In the quiet town of Pine Hill, the murder of Jennifer Johnson shocked everyone. This peaceful place, known for its close community, was shaken by a crime of passion and betrayal. The lives of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson, were closely linked in ways that led to obsession, lies, and murder. Daniel Garner, a respected architect, was known for his charm and his happy marriage to Linda, a dedicated school teacher. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, and his wife Jennifer were the Garners' closest friends. The two couples shared more than just barbecues and weekend trips. They also engaged in wife swapping, which initially added excitement to their lives. However, beneath this unusual lifestyle, dangerous emotions were brewing. Daniel became obsessed with Jennifer, and his wife Linda noticed. Jennifer, feeling the intensity of Daniel's feelings, decided to end their arrangement, not knowing the deadly consequences. Linda and Daniel had been married for 10 years and seemed to have a perfect life. They lived in a charming house with a beautiful garden that Linda loved. Mark and Jennifer moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became friends with the Garners. Mark was outgoing and Jennifer was very popular. The idea of wife swapping came up during a dinner party at the Garners' home. Fueled by wine and adventure, they discussed open relationships. Surprisingly, everyone was curious rather than shocked. They set rules to keep their primary relationships intact. The first encounter was awkward but thrilling, and soon it became a regular part of their lives, adding a spark to their marriages. At first, everything seemed fine. Both couples were happier and more connected. They maintained their social activities, carefully guarding their secret. But as months passed, subtle changes appeared, especially in Daniel's behavior. He showed an unusual interest in Jennifer, often finding reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer turned into an obsession. He thought about her constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind. What started as a harmless adventure became a dangerous obsession that would have devastating consequences for everyone involved. Pine Hill was a quiet and charming town, known for its picturesque scenery and close-knit community. Everyone knew each other, and life was peaceful. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen, until the murder of Jennifer Johnson shattered this tranquility. Jennifer Johnson was a beloved member of the community. She had a magnetic personality and was known for her striking beauty. Her husband, Mark Johnson, was a successful financial advisor. Together, they moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became friends with another couple, Daniel and Linda Garner. Daniel Garner was a well-respected architect. He was charming and seemed to have a perfect marriage with his wife, Linda, who was a dedicated third-grade teacher. The Garners and the Johnsons shared more than just their neighborhood. They shared a deep friendship. They often hosted barbecues and went on weekend trips together, strengthening their bond. However, there was a secret that these two couples shared. During a dinner party at the Garners' home, after a few glasses of wine, the conversation took a surprising turn. The idea of open relationships came up, and instead of shock, it was met with curiosity. Over the next few weeks, they discussed it more seriously and set boundaries to ensure their primary relationships remained intact. Their first wife-swapping encounter was awkward but thrilling. Daniel and Jennifer, and Mark and Linda, exchanged partners for the night. This new arrangement brought excitement and novelty to their lives. Initially, it seemed to work well. Both couples appeared happier and more connected. They continued their social activities, carefully keeping their secret. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Daniel began to show an unusual amount of interest in Jennifer. He found reasons to spend time alone with her, and Linda, his wife, noticed his growing preoccupation but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. As Daniel's fascination with Jennifer deepened, it turned into an all-consuming obsession. He thought about her constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind. What started as a harmless adventure slowly became a dangerous obsession that would lead to betrayal and murder. Daniel Garner was known for his innovative architectural designs and his charismatic personality. To the outside world, he had it all: a successful career and a loving marriage. But behind closed doors, his mind was consumed by thoughts of Jennifer Johnson. Jennifer, with her magnetic personality and striking beauty, had captivated Daniel in a way he had never experienced before. What started as a thrilling adventure had now become a dangerous obsession. Daniel found himself thinking about Jennifer constantly, even during work meetings and family dinners. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his desire for Jennifer. Daniel started finding ways to be near her. He volunteered to help with tasks that Mark usually handled and invited the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda, Daniel's wife, began to notice the change in him. At first, she thought it was just the excitement of their new lifestyle, but soon she realized that Daniel's interest in Jennifer went beyond their agreement. He became irritable and distant when they weren't with the Johnsons, and his conversations often veered towards Jennifer's likes, dislikes, and habits. One evening, while cleaning up after a dinner party, Linda confronted Daniel about his behavior. He dismissed her concerns, accusing her of being jealous. Linda, not wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had established, let it go but kept a closer eye on him. Meanwhile, Jennifer began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. At first, she was flattered by his attention, but soon it became uncomfortable. His touches became more possessive, and his words more intimate than appropriate. She discussed her discomfort with Mark, who brushed it off, believing Daniel was just more expressive in his affections. Mark's nonchalance left Jennifer feeling isolated in her concerns. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin. The couples had planned the getaway to reconnect and enjoy some time away from their routine. However, the trip only served to highlight Daniel's fixation on Jennifer. He monopolized her time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle resistance from Daniel. One night, while sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed the line. He spoke about leaving everything behind and starting fresh, just the two of them. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again. This time, he was less dismissive, but still refused to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the extent of Daniel's obsession. She loved her husband, but was increasingly aware that his infatuation with Jennifer could destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic. He started following Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes, and even appearing at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease turned to fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether. She hoped that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses, and they could all move on from this chapter without causing further harm. Jennifer decided to take control of the situation. She knew she had to end the arrangement before Daniel's obsession caused irreparable damage. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house unannounced. Jennifer was taken aback but let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Daniel confessed his feelings for her, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer, horrified, tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement was never meant to be more than a temporary excitement. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear turned to anger. She realized she needed to put an end to this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. Jennifer told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. Over the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, she also felt a twisted loyalty to Daniel. She promised Jennifer she would talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. However, Daniel's obsession only deepened. He started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours, and leaving her messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer's unease turned to outright fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to confront Daniel one last time, hoping to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park, away from prying eyes. Jennifer reiterated that their arrangement was over and that his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on. Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. He accused her of leading him on and playing with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they part ways and return to their respective marriages. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had followed Daniel to the park. She watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the confrontation unfold. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the determination on Jennifer's. Linda knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation turned to anger. Jennifer's refusal to entertain his fantasies felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached the two, her voice shaking as she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage, and he turned to her, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, taking advantage of the distraction, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him down. She reassured him that they would find a way to move past this, but inside, she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. The confrontation at the park had left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection and Linda's unexpected appearance had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He vacillated between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. Jennifer, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work to find Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank at the sight of him, and she steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm, as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing the futility of the conversation, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was tight and painful, and Jennifer could see the madness in his eyes. She struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The noise attracted the attention of a neighbor, who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Linda, hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet with her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, explained the encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel and make him understand that their relationship was over. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side and betraying him. The argument escalated, and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him and that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed that the only way to resolve the situation was to eliminate the source of his pain. He decided that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. Breaking in through a side window, he quietly crept into the house, his mind a chaotic mix of love, rage, and desperation. Jennifer, exhausted from the turmoil of the past few weeks, had gone to bed early. She awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, a kitchen knife gleaming in his hand. Fear gripped her as she tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth with his hand. His grip was strong and unyielding. In a fit of rage, Daniel plunged the knife into Jennifer's chest, silencing her cries. As Jennifer's life slipped away, Daniel stood over her, his mind a haze of conflicting emotions. The reality of what he had done began to sink in, and panic set in. Fleeing the scene, Daniel returned home, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. Linda, seeing his trembling, incoherent state, realized immediately what he had done. In a moment of twisted loyalty, she decided to help him cover up the crime. Linda led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes and wash off the blood. Her mind raced with the urgency of their predicament. She knew they had to act fast to cover up the crime and protect their secret life. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, the water turning pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. She scrubbed the floor where he had walked, making sure to eliminate any trace of blood. Once Daniel was cleaned up, Linda sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed to create an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then, she drove to a secluded area outside of town, where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying that the fire would consume any remaining evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, although visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. Despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. As the weeks went by, the tension between them grew. Daniel's mental state continued to deteriorate, and Linda struggled to keep their life from unraveling completely. The horrific act they had committed bound them together in a dark and twisted partnership, one that neither of them could escape. In few weeks, investigation successfully catch the criminal. Daniel and Linda arrest. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner sent shockwaves through Pine Hill and beyond. As the community grappled with the betrayal and tragedy that had unfolded in their midst, Mark Johnson faced the daunting task of rebuilding his life in the wake of Jennifer's senseless murder. With Daniel sentenced to life in prison without parole and Linda facing a lengthy prison term, Pine Hill began to heal, though scars remained. The once close-knit community now bore the weight of suspicion and loss, questioning how such darkness had hidden beneath the surface of their idyllic town. Mark, though grateful for justice served, found little solace in the legal outcomes. He mourned Jennifer deeply, struggling to reconcile the woman he loved with the victim of a violent crime. Memories of their life together haunted him, each moment tinged with the knowledge of what had been taken from him. Meanwhile, Daniel languished in his prison cell, tormented by guilt and remorse. The reality of his actions weighed heavily on his soul, each day a relentless reminder of the irreversible harm he had caused. Surrounded by concrete walls and steel bars, he faced a lifetime of penance for a moment of madness. Linda, separated from Daniel by prison walls, grappled with her own sense of culpability. Regret gnawed at her conscience as she reflected on the choices that had led them down this dark path. Behind bars, she sought redemption, hoping to someday find forgiveness for the role she played in Jennifer's death.